Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, I am so incredibly excited for this one because today we are diving deep into the untold cultural history of the DIY creators who quite literally built the UK's black music and club scene from the ground up.
You could hear the sound of a steam train coming down the road. That's how Leslie Peverick described his legendary locomotion sound system. You know, before the sleek, perfectly engineered mega clubs that we're all used to today, pioneers like Leslie were out there building completely DIY setups. And these rigs, they were so overwhelmingly powerful that the bass would physically rattle the windows down the street. You didn't just hear it, it hit you right in the chest.
Which really leads us to the core question of today's Explainer. How on earth did a DIY movement, using scavenged wood from local building sites, manage to reshape British club culture forever? Today, we are going to explore exactly how these underground visionaries transitioned from their reggae roots to forge an entirely new, massive soul subculture. A subculture that absolutely influences how we experience music and nightlife to this very day.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the origins of the sound systems. Then look at how they built these steam trains. Explore the massive reggae to soul shift. Check out the legendary clubs and parties. See how this went beyond the turntables. And finally, look at the enduring legacy of a true DJ.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Origins of the Sound Systems and this overwhelming need for bass.
Picture this. It's the 1960s, and young, black British youth are feeling completely alienated by the mainstream club scene. The big dance halls of the era, places like the Lyceum, they just didn't have the audio power. You had incredibly weak bass, low volume, and DJs who were strictly spinning pop hits like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. In fact, they literally refused to play imported soul records because they were terrified of royalty issues. Now contrast that with the raw power of the sound systems. These were custom-built specifically so the music could be felt in your chest. They played the imported soul, reggae, and dub that the youth actually wanted to dance to. And listen, this wasn't just some overnight fad. It was a multi-decade evolution, sparked by a huge, glaring gap in the market. In 1965, you've got locomotion starting to rattle windows in local youth clubs. Fast forward to 1978, and the Sweet Harmony sound system is being built by ambitious teenagers fresh out of school. And by the time we hit the vibrant 1980s, absolute giants of the scene like Mastermind and Soul Inc. are joining forces to create fusion. So we're looking at a sustained, evolving cultural movement.
Which brings us to Section 2, Building the Steam Train. Or, as I like to call it, absolute DIY engineering. Because specialized disco equipment was incredibly scarce and, let's be honest, ridiculously expensive, these DJs had to become grassroots engineers. First, they would go out and scavenge chipboard and plywood from local demolition sites. Then, they built these massive, Formica-covered square boxes, wiring up giant speakers with super heavy valve amplifiers. And finally, okay, this is my absolute favorite detail. They would creatively hook up literal car ignition keys to trigger their custom lighting arrays. I mean, they were turning literal spare parts into pure audiovisual magic right in their living rooms. It's genius.
And because they created this unique, heavy sound, early crews could actually charge promoters a serious premium. We're talking around 30 to 40 pounds a night. Now, I know 40 pounds might not sound like a huge deal to us today, but back in the late 60s and 70s, that was a ton of money. It just goes to show how highly valued this DIY engineering was. Promoters desperately needed these crews to bring that heavy sound to their venues.
Moving right along to Section 3, the reggae to soul shift. This was a major cultural pivot for the scene.
So as the physical sound systems are growing more and more sophisticated, the musical ambitions of the DJs start expanding too, marking a really distinct cultural shift in the late 70s. While the traditional sound systems strictly played roots, reggae, and dub, this new generation began passionately embracing the slick, imported sounds of American soul and R&B. And honestly, it was such a massive pivot that initially, if you played soul on one of these huge reggae rigs, people would look at you like you thought you were in New York.
So how did these groups stand out? Well, innovators like the Mastermind Roadshow reinvented the whole aesthetic. They weren't just playing funk, they brought in a unique visual logo to separate themselves from the pack. Meanwhile, Soul Inc. showed up offering professional double decks, synchronized dancers, and strobe lighting. When these two powerhouse crews finally combined to form Fusion, it was a total game changer. It proved once and for all that there was a massive, dedicated demand for strictly soul nights, elevating the whole thing from a simple youth club disco to a highly professional, totally immersive experience.
All right, Section 4 takes us to the legendary clubs and parties, because this is where the magic actually happened.
This revolutionary new music desperately needed a home, right? And these sound systems totally transformed ordinary spaces into packed-out cultural sanctuaries. Take Phoebe's in North London. They boldly offered 3 distinct floors of music, a hard dub room downstairs, a restaurant in the middle to chill out, and a soul vibe upstairs. Then you've got the Red Line, a massive 1,000-capacity venue where promoters would literally project Tom and Jerry cartoons on the wall while thousands of people danced to heavy soul records. And of course, the Q Club, or People's Club, where the demand was so insanely high that DJs had to sleep in their vans in rotating shifts just to keep the music bumping until 6 a.m.
But hey, what if you weren't in a club? Well, these crews would just take over privately owned houses and demolish streets for unstoppable all-night house parties. See, entire blocks would be slated for demolition by the council, but since a few houses were still privately owned, crews would drag their heavy speakers inside and rave right through the night. The police would drive past, see exactly what was going on, and just keep driving. They knew the youth were contained and safe inside. It was just sheer, unstoppable community spirit.
Now for Section 5, Beyond the Turntables. This is all about how this movement ended up shaping the broader UK media landscape.
Because the creative force of this scene didn't just stay underground. It actually bled directly into the highest levels of British television and music production. Take Carlton White, also known as Slaps. He perfectly captures his musical beginnings, saying, "He gave me bongo drums. He said, I'm going to play a piece of music and you're going to play to it." Carlton was literally pulled out of a school assembly as a kid because a teacher spotted his natural rhythm. He went from playing bongos and guitars in youth club soul bands to completely reshaping UK pop culture.
And the scale of his impact was just massive. White took his deep clubland background and used it to compose for iconic, groundbreaking Black British television shows. He did the theme for The Real McCoy, he scored music for The Posse, and incredibly, he provided the musical heartbeat for the absolutely beloved sitcom Desmond's. And get this, he actually secured that job by bravely pointing out the irony of a hit show about Black culture using non-Black composers for its music. These DIY pioneers weren't just playing records, they were breaking major industry barriers.
Which brings us to our final section, the legacy of a true DJ and their ultimate philosophy.
Because despite all the massive speakers, the custom lighting setups, and the eventual TV accolades, everything really comes back to the core philosophy of what makes a true DJ. As pioneers like Casey Genesis Jones point out, a real DJ isn't just someone pressing play on a record. A true DJ is a master of assessment. They are constantly looking at the room, reading the crowd's energy, maintaining the hype, and seamlessly bridging the gap between different musical energies. It is a brilliant art form of human connection, and it was perfected right there in the heat of those early DIY dances.
So I want to leave you with this final kind of provocative thought. If modern club culture, with its massive festivals and pristine global superstars, was originally built on scavenged wood, car ignition keys, and sheer undeniable passion, what raw DIY movements are silently shaping our future right now? The next time you step into a sleek, perfectly tuned nightclub, I want you to remember the heavy bass of the steam train. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep your ears open for the next revolution, because it's probably being built in a basement somewhere today.